It was a Wednesday, the kind of ordinary, forgettable weekday that should have ended with me walking through my front door, dropping my keys on the entryway table, and collapsing onto the couch with leftovers and reruns of whatever sitcom was mindless enough to help me unwind. Instead, I pulled into my driveway to find something that made my stomach twist before I'd even stepped out of the car. My front door had a new lock, and taped right across the middle was a sheet of bright orange paper, bold. Blocky font shouting, "Property under temporary control. HOA authority enforced. Contact office for reinstatement." At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, a prank, some overzealous maintenance warning gone wrong. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my keyring, and tried the door out of instinct. But my key didn't even go in. The cylinder had been replaced entirely. I stood on the porch for a solid minute, blinking, replaying the morning in my head like some micro-thriller trying to find the inciting incident I'd missed. Nothing stood out. I had no notices, no emails, no violations pending as far as I knew. The last time I even had contact with the HOA was months ago, a minor spat about the height of my front hedge. I trimmed it, end of story, or so I thought. "Can I help you?" I turned. There she was, clipboard in hand. That unmistakable, tight-lipped smile that never reached her eyes. Linda, the self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac. Technically, Linda Chen, HOA president. But everyone just called her Linda, and not affectionately. "This your residence?" she asked, though she already knew. I gave a small, confused nod. "Yeah, I live here." "What the hell is going on?" She clicked her pen against the metal clip like it was a gavel. "As per Section 14B of our revised HOA Charter, your property has been temporarily secured due to ongoing non-compliance." "What non-compliance?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "I haven't received a single notice. No emails, no phone calls. You can't just change someone's locks." She didn't blink. Failure to respond to a formal violation is considered tacit acknowledgement. You forfeited your access under administrative policy. You can schedule a hearing with the compliance subcommittee if you'd like. There was something terrifying in how calm she was, how rehearsed it all sounded. Like she'd said it 100 times, like I wasn't the first. "This is illegal," I said. "You can't bar someone from their home." Linda gave a little shrug, like she was brushing lint off her shoulder. "You can take it up with this board." Then she turned and walked back to her golf cart, yes, a literal OA-branded golf cart, and drove off. The hum of the electric motor fading into the still air of my now not-so-private property. I stood there for a while, holding my keys, staring at the lock, like it might somehow change back if I stared hard enough. It didn't. I tried calling the HOA number listed on the paper. It went straight to voicemail. Then I did the only thing I could think of. I walked around to the backyard, found a dry patch of grass, and sat down. My phone was already buzzing neighbors, a few friends I'd messaged in disbelief, even my cousin in Arizona who saw a photo I posted and wanted to know, "Dude, is this real?" Oh, it was real. And as the sun dipped behind the houses, painting long shadows across the lawn, I no longer had legal access to. Something inside me shifted. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was something bigger and more dangerous. I grabbed a blanket from my car and set up camp right there in my own yard. The irony, I still had access to the Wi-Fi. I opened a new TikTok, set my phone against a water bottle, and hit record. My name is James Carter. I'm standing well, sitting in my own backyard. Because the HOA changed the locks on my front door. Without warning, without cause. I don't know how this happened, but I'm going to find out, and I'm not backing down. I posted it, thought nothing of it. By the time I woke up the next morning, it had 2 million views. The story was no longer just mine. It was everybody's. By the time I made it to a local coffee shop the next morning, hair a mess, backpack slung over one shoulder, running on 0 hours of sleep and 2 shots of espresso, I was being recognized. Not just by neighbors, but by strangers. "You're the guy from the TikTok," right? A college kid at the next table asked. The HOA lockout thing. That's messed up, man. Yeah, I muttered, sipping my coffee. It is. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing all night. My video had been stitched, duetted, dissected by lawyers, tenant rights activists, and suburban dads who probably once lost a leaf blower to HOA rules. Hashtags like Lockout HOA and Lindagate were trending. Local news outlets had picked it up too, and still, I didn't have access to my home. I drove to the HOA office that morning, a beige prefab building tucked behind a small strip mall. It looked more like a dental record storage unit than a place that wielded authority over hundreds of homes. Inside, the air was too cold, the walls too white. A receptionist in tortoise-shell glasses sat behind the desk, chewing gum slowly like she'd been trained by DMV agents. "Hi," I said, already feeling my patience run thin. "I need to speak to someone about a lock change on my front door. That I didn't authorize." She didn't blink. "Name James Carter. Tap, tap, tap." She looked at her screen like she was reading hieroglyphs. "You're flagged for Tier 3 escalation. You'll need to schedule a compliance interview." "No. I'll need someone to explain why I'm locked out of my own house without a court order." She blew a bubble. "Sir, you're welcome to file a rebuttal." I leaned in. "Ma'am, I'm a homeowner. This isn't a parking ticket. You can't just make up levels of escalation and change someone's locks. That's called illegal eviction." Still chewing, still unmoved. It's in the charter. I left before I said something that would land me in actual legal trouble. Back in the car, I pulled up the HOA charter from their website, buried under layers of PDFs and links that hadn't been updated since the Bush administration. It was a mess. Pages of vague language, loopholes that said things like access revocation, in instances of persistent noncompliance, may be executed with board approval. But nowhere did it say they could lock me out without court authorization. So I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, I called Teresa Alvarez, a local bulldog who specialized in property rights and wasn't afraid of a fight. She was already familiar with my case thanks to the viral video. Let me guess, she said, half laughing. They cited Article 14, Section B or something equally bogus exactly. I've taken on HOA overreach before, but this one's bold. Meet me in an hour. Bring all the documents you can. We sat in her office, dusty legal books lining the walls, framed headlines from past courtroom wins as she went through the violations they'd supposedly issued. "Half of these aren't even enforceable," she said. "Improper trash bin placement, non-regulation shade of beige paint, decorative wreath with seasonal references." What the hell does that even mean? I laughed, but only to keep from screaming. "They issued me 37 violations," I said, "all in one envelope." "Because they were building a paper trail," she replied, flipping the pages, "to justify the lockout. That's how they do it. Death by documentation." But guess what? They forgot the part where you need a court order to take possession of someone's property. She snapped the file closed. "We're going to file an emergency injunction today, and I'm going to make some calls. Back at the coffee shop later." I uploaded another video. Calm. Clear. This time. I used screenshots of the violations, Teresa's quotes, even snippets of the HOA charter. "This isn't about a trash can," I said into the camera. "This is about power. About how a few people, hiding behind policy and paperwork, can make life miserable for the rest of us. But not anymore." By the time I walked outside, a man in a suit was waiting for me on the sidewalk. "Mr. Carter," he asked, pulling out a badge. "I'm with the state attorney's office. We saw your video. Mind if we talk?" Things were about to get serious. I invited the man from the state attorney's office to sit with me on a nearby bench under the awning of the cafe. Rain had started to fall soft and steady, adding a cinematic touch to the moment, like the universe itself was holding its breath. "I'm Investigator Nathan Wells," he said, flipping open a leather folder with his credentials. "We monitor reports of HOA abuse across the state. Your video triggered 3 hotline complaints and 2 emails from former residents. Seems you're not the only one." I felt the first flicker of validation, a quiet heat behind the ribs. "I've got documents," I said. "A lawyer, too. We're filing for an injunction." Wells nodded. "That's good. But I want to go deeper. What you've exposed may be part of a broader pattern. We're seeing HOAs across the region inflate fines, invent policies, even change locks on properties they technically don't control." He paused, tapping his pen against the folder. "If you're willing, I'd like your help gathering more testimonies from neighbors. And if it comes to it, be a witness in a larger investigation." I nodded. "I'm in." That night, I knocked on doors. People who used to avoid me in the street now opened up like floodgates. A retired teacher who had been fined $500 for putting up Halloween decorations too early. A single mother forced to repaint her house 3 times in 1 year for tone variance. A veteran cited for unauthorized porch furniture. It was a rocking chair his wife had gifted him before she passed. Story after story, all eerily similar. And at the center of each, the same signatures. The same wording, the same petty tyrant, Linda Chen, HOA president. She had been president for 6 years, re-elected in uncontested votes, running unopposed thanks to bylaw amendments that made candidacy impossible for non-compliant members. She'd installed a circle of loyalists, appointed rather than elected, and together they'd built a paper empire of rules designed to control, isolate, and extort. My lawyer, Teresa, went to work like a woman possessed. She found discrepancies in how notices were delivered. Many hadn't even been mailed, just stuffed into doors without timestamps. Others bore forged digital signatures. The real bombshell came when she traced the locksmith used to change my locks. Turns out, the HOA didn't go through a licensed vendor. They hired an unregistered contractor, a man who'd been cited for illegal entry on another HOA property just a year prior. His invoice had been paid in cash, with no tax record. Teresa leaned back in her chair, eyes gleaming. "This isn't just negligence, this is systemic abuse. We have enough here to get the injunction, sue for unlawful eviction, and potentially press criminal charges." We filed the injunction on Thursday morning. By Friday, a judge issued a temporary restraining order against the HOA board, prohibiting them from enforcing any fines, accessing private property, or communicating with residents until further notice. And on Saturday morning, I got my keys back. The locksmith, a real one, came with an officer present. We filmed the whole thing, the moment I stepped back into my home. I stood at the doorway and took a long breath. Everything was as I left it. No forced entry, just a layer of silence and the aftertaste of injustice. I posted one final clip that evening. It was simple. Just me, holding up my keys. Caption, "The locks are back." But this time, so is the truth. That one hit 1 million views in 6 hours. But this story wasn't over. Because just as the HOA's walls began to crack, someone inside was about to flip and expose just how deep the corruption went. It started with a knock at my door. Not loud, not aggressive, just 3 calm taps, like someone who didn't want to startle me but had something heavy to deliver. I opened it to find a woman in her mid-40s, her umbrella dripping rainwater onto the welcome mat. Her eyes were wary, her lips trembling slightly as she whispered, "Can I come in?" Her name was Priya Sharma, and she was the HOA's former secretary. "I can't stay long," she said, wiping her hands nervously on her jacket. "They don't know I'm here, but they will if they find out I've been talking. I saw your videos, and I saw what they did to your house. I can't keep pretending." I offered her tea, but she waved it off, pulling a flash drive from her coat pocket and setting it on the table like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "This has everything," she said. "Meeting minutes, fake invoices, internal emails, Linda's voice recordings." I blinked. "Voice recordings?" Priya nodded. She never trusted anyone. She recorded every board meeting, even private calls. She thought it was her insurance, but now it's evidence. I opened my laptop and slid in the drive. Folders appeared, dozens, labeled meticulously. Some with titles like Special Fines Adjustments, others named after residents. One folder simply read, Chen Private. Priya leaned in. They knew they didn't have authority to change locks. Linda said it outright. I quote, "They'll never challenge us. Most of them won't even call a lawyer. You want control, you make them scared to knock on the door. It hit me like a punch to the chest. These weren't just bad rules. They were weaponized policies designed to humiliate, isolate, and intimidate. Priya told me about a vote that had been faked last year, one that extended Linda's presidency without quorum, about a hidden account siphoning administrative fees into a P.O. box in another state, about a lawyer, yes, their own legal counsel who had quietly resigned and was under a gag order. I thought about quitting, she said, her voice breaking, but I stayed because I hoped someone would stand up, and now that you have, I need to help. I was speechless. I took her hand. You just did. The next morning, I met Teresa in her office and showed her everything. Her eyes went wide as she scrolled. We don't just have a civil case now, she said. We have criminal conspiracy, mail fraud, extortion. And if these recordings are admissible, they're toast. The timing couldn't have been better. The temporary injunction had shifted public opinion. Now the residents were watching, waiting. We drafted a public statement and handed it to the press. Then we shared clips from the recordings on my social page, subtitled and verified. Linda's voice, clear as day, let them whine. They'll pay the fine or they'll get locked out. One trash can, one dandelion. That's all it takes. The community went nuclear within 24 hours. 3 board members resigned. A crowd gathered outside the HOA office, residents holding signs, chanting, "No more fear," and "Unlock our lives." Local news vans pulled up. Reporters called it the lockout scandal. My videos were quoted on air. Priya's bravery was celebrated anonymously. And behind the scenes, the state attorney's office had already begun preparing subpoenas. Warrants were being filed. Linda Chen was nowhere to be found. But I had a feeling she wasn't gone for good. And when she came back, I'd be waiting with keys in hand, and the whole town behind me. They thought I'd stop at a few videos, maybe a social media post or two. Maybe I'd throw a fit, hire a lawyer, and eventually run out of steam like the others. But they didn't count on Priya. And they certainly didn't count on what was coming next. Once we went public with the recordings, the entire dynamic shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't the paranoid homeowner obsessed with a trash can. I was the guy who cracked open the rot festering beneath a suburban utopia. And it turned out I wasn't alone. The night after the news broke, my porch light flickered on, motion sensor triggered by a steady trickle of neighbors. They came bearing stories, photos, documents, little pieces of the same puzzle. An elderly couple with a $600 fine for leaf overflow, a single mom forced to paint her mailbox 6 times in one summer, a teenager fined for noise violations when he played the saxophone at 3 p.m. They had been humiliated, silenced, isolated. But now they were emboldened. One man, a retired city planner named Robert Hayes, pulled out blueprints. "This is the original subdivision layout," he said, laying them flat on my kitchen table. "You see these easements? These are not HOA controlled. They've been fencing off and claiming utility corridors and water runoff paths for years." His finger jabbed at a curved road. And this used to be public access until they reclassified it private with forged signage. My jaw clenched. It was worse than I imagined. The very next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the county recorder's office. Teresa and I compiled a report that included video evidence, audio files, blueprint comparisons, and personal testimonies. We knew Linda and her board had overreached, but now we had proof that they'd crossed legal lines into municipal fraud. Meanwhile, my house became a headquarters. Coffee brewed nonstop. Printouts covered every surface. My garage transformed into a war room, complete with corkboards, string lines, and yellow sticky notes. We weren't just building a case, we were building a movement. A movement that Linda couldn't control, until she tried. It was midnight when my phone buzzed, a private number. I let it go to voicemail. Then came the second call, and the third. Finally, I answered. Yeah. A pause. Then her voice. "You think you're clever, don't you?" She sounded different. Not polished, not in control, desperate. "You're playing a dangerous game," she hissed. "You don't know who you're dealing with." I didn't speak. I let the silence hang. "You have no idea how far this goes," she said. "Back off. before someone gets hurt. Then she hung up. I stood there holding the phone, letting her words echo into the dark. It was the moment I knew this wasn't just about one HOA. This was about the people who build empires of fear behind community rules and loopholes. People like Linda, who weaponized bureaucracy and expected no one to fight back. But I wasn't going anywhere. The next day, I changed every lock in my house, not because I was afraid, because I was preparing. By the weekend, we had a list every resident who had been fined, harassed, or locked out. We tracked how much money the HOA had collected under Linda's leadership, nearly $420,000 over 24 months. Then we matched it against public repairs and infrastructure work under $50,000 spent. The rest unaccounted for. I emailed the local news anchor who had run the lockout story. "We have receipts," I wrote, and a former board member ready to testify. He responded within 10 minutes. "We're sending a crew Monday morning." Linda must have sensed the walls closing in, because that Sunday, something changed. Dozens of homes received letters, hand-delivered, no envelope. Just a single sheet of paper with bold red text, "Violation of community trust, subject to HOA disciplinary review." People were furious. They brought the letters to my front door. Most of them didn't even know what they'd violated. One man had only parked his trailer in his own driveway for a weekend. Another woman said she left her porch light on all night, which somehow invited vagrants. It was her final tactic: blanket intimidation, a last-ditch effort to scare people silent. But it backfired, because that night, we held the first neighborhood meeting in the park without HOA permission. Over 60 people came. Some brought folding chairs. Others brought signs. One even brought a bullhorn. And I stood in the center, not as the victim anymore, but as the one who finally said what everyone had been thinking for years. "We're done being afraid." Linda didn't show up, but someone else did. A man in a dark blazer approached after the meeting, flashed a badge, and introduced himself. "Agent Brooks," he said. "Federal Crimes Division. We've been watching your case closely. Would you be willing to cooperate in a broader investigation?" I nodded slowly. "What kind of broader?" He tucked a folder into my hand. "Let's just say, Linda Chen isn't the only one in the state running this kind of game." My fingers closed around the file. The locks were just the beginning. By Monday morning, it wasn't just the neighborhood whispering. It was the entire county. The news crew arrived right on time. A white van marked with the station's logo rolled into my driveway as if it had done so 100 times before. The anchor, Sam Ellis, stepped out, sharp suit, calm demeanor, but eyes that burned with curiosity. I could tell he'd seen stories like this spiral into something national, even viral. And now, he smelled another one. I gave him the tour not of my home, but of the truth. Teresa had printed charts showing HOA spending versus income, complete with missing entries and suspicious reimbursements. Robert showed him maps of restricted areas that Linda had relabeled as common spaces to justify fines. I played the voicemail she'd left me. "Sounds like a threat," Sam murmured. "It was," I said plainly. He nodded, already framing the headline in his mind. As they set up cameras on my front porch, more neighbors trickled in. A man named Charlie, a retired Marine, arrived with documents showing his veteran exemption for property taxes, which the HOA had ignored when issuing fines. A mother named Maria came with her daughter in tow. Maria spoke Spanish, and her daughter translated their mailbox had been repeatedly vandalized. And when they asked for help, Linda threatened a lien on their home for improper maintenance. These weren't isolated incidents. They were a pattern. Sam Ellis's eyes lit up. "This story's going to hit harder than I thought." Linda's response came swiftly and predictably, with that same brittle confidence she always wore like perfume. A cease and desist letter arrived via courier, not from a real law firm, but from Chen Community Legal Services, a shell entity she'd registered 2 years prior. The letter accused me of public defamation, incitement, and even interfering with private governance. I laughed out loud. Then I handed it to Agent Brooks the next day. "You did the right thing," he said. "We already ran the business name. It's not licensed, just another tool in her kit." Then he paused. But we also found something else. He pulled out a folder with the HOA's official stamp on it, or so it seemed. When he flipped it open, I saw a list of probationary members with names highlighted in red. These are homeowners, Linda identified as non-compliant, for everything from lawn color to political signs. The board then tracked these individuals, approved unannounced inspections, and shared private information between board members without consent. I stared at the page. My name was near the top. So were Teresa's, Robert's, Maria's. This wasn't just about power. It was about control. The news segment aired that Friday evening. Suburban HOA accused of harassment, financial misconduct, and fake legal threats, the headline read. It opened with footage of Linda at a past board meeting, smiling, making promises about neighborhood values. Then it cut to my porch, where I held up the fake cease and desist letter. She told me I was breaking the rules, I said to camera. Turns out, she was the one writing them in pencil. The report ended with Agent Brooks confirming an ongoing investigation into possible federal violations. Linda disappeared the next day. We didn't know where she went, not exactly. But neighbors reported seeing a U-Haul leave her driveway just after midnight, and her phone number stopped working. Her house sat dark for days. Then a for sale by owner sign appeared on the lawn. No realty company, no contact info. But the damage had already been done. With Linda gone, the HOA board fell apart like a brittle deck of cards. 2 members resigned immediately. One tried to delete all past meeting records from the server, but was caught by our tech-savvy neighbor Derek, who'd mirrored everything to a backup drive weeks earlier. A town hall was called, not by the HOA, by the people. We gathered at the local rec center, over 200 strong. No suits, no gavel. Just folding chairs and open mics. People spoke freely for the first time in years. They didn't argue, they shared. A father described how his autistic son was scolded by a compliance officer for chalk drawings on the sidewalk. A gardener recounted how his small home business was shut down after Linda claimed his plants were non-native species. Then I stood up. I'm not here to lead, I said. But I am here to remind us this is our land, our homes, our community. It doesn't belong to a board or a signature. It belongs to every voice in this room. Applause thundered through the gym. Someone shouted, "Let's start over." And so we did. That night, a committee was formed entirely volunteer-based. No salaries, no closed meetings. Every policy would be public, every vote recorded. I declined the offer to chair the committee, but I agreed to help write the new charter. We called it the Homeowners Pact. Its first line read, "We govern with fairness, not fear." Days later, I got one last package, no return address. Inside was Linda's HOA badge, cracked in half. No note, just silence. But sometimes, silence is the sweetest kind of ending. Even with Linda gone, her shadow still lingered in policy loopholes, hidden fines, and a board stacked with silence and self-preservation. But now, without their queen, the remaining board members didn't know where to turn. And as it turns out, without Linda pulling the strings, the HOA wasn't a machine. It was a house of cards built on threats, vanity, and fear. The first to speak was Michael Allen, the treasurer. He stood at the next community meeting like a man at confession. I didn't know how bad it was, he said, palms open. I approved the budgets. I signed the reimbursements, but she told me the legal team had it all cleared. I should have asked more questions. His voice cracked. I'm sorry. People wanted someone to blame. But Michael's remorse was real. He brought boxes of documents, some of which we hadn't seen, and turned them over to Agent Brooks's team directly. They contained everything line item receipts, payment logs, and minutes from emergency sessions that had never been disclosed. One particularly damning email, marked confidential, read, "If we increase late fees by 12% and double the fine period, we can generate enough to cover the pool remodel without asking for a vote. People will grumble, but they'll pay." Signed by Linda. The story gained traction online. Sam Ellis's segment was picked up by a national affiliate. Headlines followed Suburban HOA, accused of using fines to fund luxury perks. Locked-out residents say HOA used security teams to enforce illegal rules. People from other states started writing to me. They shared stories of similar abuse, of fake bylaws, illegal inspections, and nightmare fines. And just like that, Pine Gate became a symbol not of dysfunction, but of awakening. And still, the board refused to dissolve. So we raised the stakes. We filed a class action suit. Led by Teresa and Robert, with support from over 60 residents, the suit alleged fraud, misuse of funds, and violation of homeowners' rights under state housing law. It wasn't about money. It was about ending the charade once and for all. Our lawyer, Mrs. Patel, was the kind of woman who made silence feel like a warning. In court, she moved with surgical precision. During the first hearing, she presented three things: a recording of Linda referring to fines as non-tax revenue, a document showing HOA funds spent on first-class travel to an administrative training held in Cancun, an affidavit from a board member who admitted votes were often pre-decided by private emails. The judge raised an eyebrow. This isn't a homeowners association. It's a cartel in khakis. With court pressure mounting, the remaining board members caved. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, a formal resignation letter was posted to the HOA bulletin board, duct-taped over one of Linda's old flyers. It read, "Effective immediately. The Pine Gate HOA board is dissolved pending reorganization under county supervision. All fines are frozen. All liens are to be reviewed for legality. We will cooperate fully with the ongoing investigation. Signed, the remaining members." We celebrated. Not with champagne or parades, but with a bonfire. That Saturday, in Teresa's backyard, we burned the last copies of the HOA's Rules of Conduct pamphlet. Neighbors clapped as the flames consumed their tyranny. The children laughed and danced. An older man with a guitar played folk songs from the 70s. We weren't just taking back our homes. We were reclaiming joy. Then, just as I was walking back to the fire pit, with a tray of cider, Agent Brooks approached quietly from the shadows. He handed me a folder. "What's this?" I asked. "Linda's bigger than you thought." Inside were names, addresses, photos. "She's connected to 3 other HOAs," he said. "One in Arizona, one in Nevada, one here. Same tactics, same structure. We believe she built a multi-state scheme using HOA boards as shells to funnel and launder money." I blinked. So it wasn't just about power. "No," he said. "It was about control and cash." That night, as I stood beneath the stars, watching the last embers flicker, I realized something. This wasn't the end of a story. It was the middle of a reckoning. The bonfire marked a turning point, but what came next was less poetic, a war waged with subpoenas, depositions, and court calendars. For every document we burned, 5 more were unearthed. What started as a neighborhood rebellion had become a statewide legal battle, and I found myself at the center of it. The class action suit expanded. By midweek, we'd added 2 neighboring developments that had once been part of Pine Gate's extended residential network, a phrase Linda had used to justify collecting dues and enforcing policies on properties that were never legally annexed. Families from those areas reached out with similar stories. Locks changed. Driveways blocked. Citations issued for imaginary violations. One woman, Sophia Torres, described being fined $500 for having a non-compliant exterior paint tone, even though her house hadn't been painted in over 10 years. Another homeowner, Curtis Brooks, had been towed for prohibited RV storage, even though he parked his camper on his own land behind a locked gate. Each story added fuel to the fire. And with every signed affidavit, our case grew stronger. Behind the scenes, Agent Brooks and his team uncovered the skeletons Linda had tried to bury. A hidden bank account in the Cayman Islands, shell companies registered to fake addresses, kickbacks to contractors who inflated invoices by 40% in exchange for consulting fees. The FBI began treating it as a racketeering case. Not just HOA fraud, organized crime. The kind of thing you'd expect in a political thriller. not a cul-de-sac lined with wind chimes and lilac bushes. Meanwhile, Linda's defense team tried to play the victim card. She hadn't fled. They argued she was in a mental health retreat. The wire transfers misinterpreted consulting payments, the annexation maps she used to justify HOA expansion, clerical errors. But that argument collapsed when Agent Brooks played an audio file obtained from Linda's cloud backup. Her voice, crisp and unmistakable. On a recorded phone call, if they don't comply, lock them out. Once they're trapped, they'll pay. Everyone folds when the front door doesn't open. Public outrage surged. News crews camped outside the county courthouse. TikTok videos went viral showing before and after footage of homes once fined into silence, now freely repainted, gardened, and restored. Someone even created a meme account called Linda the HOA Queen, parodying her policy memos with sarcastic captions. But beneath the humor was something powerful: awareness. People started attending their own HOA meetings, asking real questions, demanding oversight. Across the state, similar boards were being audited. Fines were frozen. Power was shifting slowly, but undeniably. The day our case went to trial, I wore my father's old tie. He'd built our house with his bare hands, laid the tile himself, taught me how to reset a breaker, sharpen a blade, mend a fence. He used to say, "Land is memory, you don't just own it, you become part of it." Linda had tried to make us feel like trespassers on our own stories, but that morning, I walked into the courtroom knowing we were finally taking them back. The proceedings lasted 2 weeks. I was called to testify on day 4. I spoke of the lock changes, the forged notices, the time I found my disabled neighbor crying on his porch because Linda's security team threatened to tow his mobility van. I told them how I'd once believed the HOA was meant to protect us, and how I learned that protection without accountability becomes oppression. When I stepped down, the courtroom was silent, not from discomfort, but from resonance. In closing arguments, Mrs. Patel said, "This case is about a simple truth that no one should be governed without consent. That power must be earned, not declared. That communities belong to the people, not to paper tyrants with clipboards and ego complexes." The jury deliberated for just 4 hours. Verdicted guilty on all counts of fraud, embezzlement, property interference, and civil rights violations. Linda would face a minimum of 20 years in federal prison. But more importantly, her entire structure, the HOA shell corporations, the financial channels, the backdoor influence she'd wielded for years, was dismantled piece by piece. We didn't celebrate with another bonfire. We celebrated by unlocking every gate, by hosting a community barbecue where the sign said, "Come as you are, no permits required," by painting a mural on the old HOA office wall, "A house with open doors, open windows," and the words "Never Again" written across the porch. And for the first time in years, I slept with my front door open, to the breeze, no locks, no fear, just freedom. The legal victory echoed across the county, but for us, the residents who had lived under Linda's manufactured rule, it wasn't just about courtroom justice. It was about living without fear, waking up without dread, and walking out the door knowing we weren't being watched, tracked, or threatened with another violation for simply being ourselves. Still, some scars ran deeper than verdicts could heal. And for me, the question remained, how did Linda get away with it for so long? I was back on my front porch, sipping coffee and staring at the gatepost where Linda's lock had once hung like a badge of domination, when I got a call from Agent Brooks. "We found something you should see," he said. "Mind stopping by the precinct by now?" I was used to these cryptic invitations, but what he had, waiting for me in the evidence room, still hit like a gut punch. A black leather binder, one of Linda's. Inside, detailed notes from the earliest days of her takeover. Handwritten lists, property assessments, psychological profiles. Next to my name, "Too quiet." Former military watch for leadership threats, likely to resist. Next to the Johnsons' elderly. Target with fines, less likely to fight back. Next to a single mother with 3 kids. Financial pressure. Use overdue notices to corner her. It was all there. Every tactic, every manipulation, every way she had turned our neighborhood into a psychological battleground. But what struck me most was a list at the back titled Control Tactics Physical. Change locks unexpectedly. Cite false safety codes. Confuse with overlapping notices. Use delays to exhaust appeal process. Linda hadn't just enforced rules. She'd weaponized bureaucracy. And I had to wonder how many other HOAs across the country were doing the same thing. I brought the binder to the next town council meeting. No preamble. I just placed it on the table, opened it to the page with the resident profiles, and let it speak for itself. Gasps, then silence, then outrage. This isn't neighborhood management, someone said. It's psychological warfare. By the end of the meeting, the council voted unanimously to begin a statewide audit of all HOAs with similar structures. A bill was proposed the following week mandating transparency, financial accountability, and criminal liability for any HOA board member found engaging in coercive practices. The bill would be called the Homeowner Protection and Empowerment Act. We called it the Key Law. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened. I started getting mail, letters from across the country, people sharing stories similar to ours. Fines for wildflowers, HOA officers peeking over fences, elderly residents evicted over mailbox colors, people thanking us, asking how we fought back. I created a website. Nothing fancy, just a clean page with free legal resources, downloadable templates for appeal letters, and a video explaining what rights homeowners actually had. Within a week, it had 30,000 visits. A month later, I was on the local news, being called the accidental activist. And I couldn't help but think of my father again. Land is memory, he said. But maybe memory becomes legacy when you use it to protect others. The last lock Linda had installed was on the maintenance shed near the lake. It was supposed to keep people from accessing the old boat ramp, the one her private security once called a restricted zone. The community gathered as we removed it together. Each neighbor who had been fined, harassed, or threatened took a turn twisting the bolt cutters. When it finally snapped, we cheered, laughed, cried. Then we set up lawn chairs, brought coolers of iced tea, and watched the sunset like free people do with nothing between them and the horizon. That night, a teenager named Marcus, who lived down the street, walked up to me holding an old padlock. He said, "I kept this one. Thought maybe we could hang it in the town museum one day." "What should the plaque say?" I asked. He smiled. "The lock that couldn't hold us." And I thought, that's it. We were never fighting fences or forms. We were fighting for the simple, stubborn truth that no one owns your home but you. That your front door isn't a privilege, it's a promise, and sometimes the only key you need is the courage to turn it. Spring came late that year, but when it did, it arrived like a cleansing rain. Our roads, once cratered and neglected under the HOA's reign, had been resurfaced this time using funds approved transparently in a town vote. The flowers that once drew violations now bloomed proudly in front yards, some even planted in tribute to the community's resistance. I passed one house with a handmade sign in the garden bed that read, "This wildflower beat your fine." I smiled. The last court hearing had concluded the week before. Linda had pled guilty to multiple counts: fraud, coercion, unlawful entry, and impersonating a government official. Her sentencing had included a 5-year prison term, restitution payments, and a permanent ban from holding any future board or leadership position in a community or HOA-related entity. She didn't even try to fight it. Her lawyer had apologized in her place, and that was the closest we'd ever get to remorse. But we didn't need her apology. We had each other now, and that was enough. The county invited me to speak at the opening of the new Civic Center, a building designed not by politicians, but by the residents. They asked if I'd tell the story, the real story, of what happened in our little neighborhood. And so I stood on a modest stage, microphone in hand, looking out at familiar faces now lit with hope instead of fear. I didn't tell them everything. I told them what mattered. That power without accountability corrupts. That silence gives bullies their strength. That when someone changes your locks and tells you it's for your own good, you have every right to say, "I never gave you the key." And when I said that, the room clapped. Not out of politeness, but because they understood. Because some of them had been there. Some still were. After the speech, a man approached me, early 60s, denim shirt, hands like he still split his own firewood. "I followed your story online," he said. "I used your template to file an injunction." Judge threw the HOA out on their ear. He reached into his coat and handed me a brass key on a string. "This one's from our shed. The first lock they changed. Figured it belonged with you." That night, I hung it on a nail above my desk, next to a framed photo of my father standing on the ranch. The caption read, "Land is memory." Now I added, "And legacy is what you do with it." Months passed. Life returned to its rhythm. Kids rode bikes down streets where cameras once pointed from every eave. Sunday barbecues returned. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now laughed across fences, offered help with groceries, shared stories of how they'd stood up in small ways and large. The website I started became a nonprofit, unlockhoa.org. It had chapters now in Colorado, Arizona, Texas, Florida. I hired a few young attorneys and former HOA whistleblowers. We hosted workshops, taught homeowners their rights. I even testified in front of the state legislature when they debated broader protections. I never planned to become an activist, but sometimes life changes the locks on you, and you have no choice but to find another door. On the 1-year anniversary of the day Linda changed my locks, we held a small gathering near the lake. I brought donuts. Someone else brought a projector. We showed a slideshow of moments from the past year, some funny, some gut-wrenching, all real. At the end, someone clicked to the final slide, a photo of the original lock Linda had placed on my shed, now hanging in a glass case at the Civic Center Museum. Below it, the inscription, "The lock that couldn't hold us." People applauded. A few wiped away tears, and I looked around at these people, my neighbors, my friends, my fellow fighters, and I realized this wasn't just a story of fighting back. It was a story of becoming free. Not from a homeowners association, but from the idea that we're powerless. We aren't. We never were. All it takes is one person, one moment, one door flung wide open, and a community willing to walk through together. And as the sun dipped low behind the ridge, casting long golden light across the water we'd once been locked out of, I thought, let them try again. This time, we've got the keys.